Or you both say, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. A great tzachos Baruch Hashem to be able to begin another week of Maseches Zevachim together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Stephen Tarizin, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in schus of the yahrzeit of Steve's father, Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Levracha, on the occasion of his 20th yahrzeit. Our week of learning sponsors, Keely and Jillian Goldberger, as a schus for a continued refuah shlema for their son Aaron Yeshaya Ben Rivka Esther. And our Daf Yomi sponsors, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and the schus of continued health for and refuah shlema for Shulam Mischana Bas Susha. In the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of those who need a refuah sheva, the Gedol Kol Cholei Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shnei Meretz Hashem, providing aliyah to all the neshamas, nechama for all of the mishpachas, continued besoros tovos. We're following along in the news. I'm sure that the potential return of the body of Hadar Golden, who has been held by our enemies for over a decade. There's something overwhelmingly and profoundly sad that sometimes our simcha comes in the return of the bodies of our precious young soldiers. But the truth is, have the schus to bring back one of Klal Yisrael's finest for Kavuras Yisrael, to be buried with his mishpacha, to be buried with his people, to be buried in his land. Halavai HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shnei Meretz Hashem give us this small measure of nechama, and it should pave the week, even it paved the way in Meretz Hashem for a week, and really just for years, filled with incredible bracha and besaros tovos all of Klal Yisrael. I will say with that, let us begin. We really have, first of all, tremendous shkoyach to Josh Erez for giving daf yesterday. Did a fantastic job. Certainly not an easy mesechta to take up. And with that, let's begin. Today's daf is Nun Vav 56. We are picking up Meretz Hashem on the bottom of Nun Hem with base 55b, second to last line on the daf. I'm Rabbi Shmuel. So I will say some interesting halachos over here, a little bit of a detour from what we've been dealing with until now. No, it's still Zevachim, not that much of a detour. Like, in other words, it's still Beis Hamikdash and Meretz Hashem, but an interesting detail. Tell me, Rabbi Shmuel. Ein chayavin mishum tuma. So I will say we're sidetracking a little bit. Take a look at the last Rashi on Amud Beis before you turn the page. Rashi says, Tuma haniknas tame laharabayis. Talking about if someone is tame and they enter into harabayis. I will say, now understand when we speak about harabayis, right? Up until now, focusing a little bit on our Beis Hamikdash. We don't need it, but I can't let a day go by without using it. So remember again, this is the Beis Hamikdash. The Harabayis, obviously, again, is much larger than this, right? This Beis Hamikdash itself was situated on the Harabayis. So remember again, when we speak about Tumah, different forms of Tumah allow you different entry into different areas. So now go back to Rashi for just a moment. So Rashi says, Hanichnas Tamid Harabayis, Eino Chayiv, so the halach is like this: if you were tamei to enter, being tamei and entering into harabayis is not good, but there's not liability. The only time you have liability for entering tuma into the makom hamikdash is literally when you're entering into this area, this picture, the Beis Hamikdash. If you enter in tamei to this area, ultimately there's liability. So now back to the Gemara. So you're only chayiv for entering Tumah into the Beis Hamikdash. Ella al top of Nun Vav 56a, orech 187 arochav 135. You're only chayiv ultimately again if you enter into the area that is 187 amas by 135. What is that area? That is this. 187 amas length by 135 width. These are the dimensions of the second Beis Hamikdash. I also want to point out, when we speak about the Beis Hamikdash in general, especially dimensionally, you can't see over here. Sorry, it's just a picture. It's the same picture. I'm just showing you the length and the width. It's the length and the width of this picture. I wanted to point out because somebody asked me this on Erev Shabbos. I took it for granted, but I should really be explicit about it. Whenever we're speaking about these images and these pictures, this is all Second Temple. All Second Temple. The first Beis Hamikdash had its own dimensions, was significantly smaller than the second Beis Hamikdash. And by the third Beis Hamikdash, there's actually, the assumption is the third Beis Hamikdash will mirror the second in many ways, dimensionally, but there may be some also differences in the third Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, This is the second Beis HaMikdash, and we are always using this as our model for our discussions. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that halacha l'maisa, a person who is tummy who enters into the Beis HaMikdash is liable if they enter into this area that is 187 amos by 135 amos. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Tani, top of Nunvav 56a, second line down. Tani, Tana Kamed Rab Nachman. So we'll say, so there's a brayso now that supports this. Kala Azara, Haisa Kuf Pei Zayin, Arochav Kuf Lamed Hey. The entire Azara. Now we'll say again, Azara, we normally translate Azara as how? Courtyard. So the truth is, remember, the Beis HaMikdash itself is actually made up of multiple Azaras. There's this initial courtyard, which is called the Ezras Nashim. It literally means like the women's courtyard. But really, that was a place where all of Klal Yisrael gathered. You enter through Shar Nikanor. There's something here called Ezras Yisrael. Technically speaking, a Yisrael is allowed to come into here. And then you have the rest of this area, which is called Ezras Kohanim. Ezras Kohanim, which is really, again, past this point in time. There was a staircase over here. This is called the Duchen, the platform. This is where the Levium would sing. And then in the rest of this area called Ezras Kohanim. Here, when we use the word Azara, Azara just means everything. Means everything. Courtyard means everything. So the courtyard, Kala Azara, the entire length of the Azara ultimately was 187 amos by a width of 135 amos. Amrlei, Hachi Amrli Abba, this is what my father once told me. Kohanim nichnasin l'sham, v'ochlin sham kodshei kadoshim. In this area, it sounds like what he's saying over here, in this area means the entire 187 amos by 135 amos. In this entire area, what could happen? Kohanim nichnasin l'sham, Kohanim could enter, v'ochlin sham kodshei kadoshim. They could eat Kodshei Kadashim, which Rabbi say again, remember, our highest level sanctity karbanos. So interestingly enough, this is actually fascinating. Again, we'll delve into this a bit more, that Kodshei Kadashim can be consumed in this entire area. Okay, that's number one. Next, V'shochtin sham Kodshim Kalim. Kodshim Kalim can be shechted in this entire area as well. V'chayavin, now I will say, if you notice, by the way, so not Kodshei Kadashim, right? Kodshei Kadashim have more limited space where Shechita could occur, but apparently Kodshei Kalim, lower sanctity karbanos ultimately can be shechted in this entire area. Okay? V'chayavin mishum tuma. And I will say, in this entire area, in other words, again, in this entire Azara, 187 amos by 135 amos, if you enter in Tameh, there is liability for Tuma entry. Incredible. So the Gemara says, now we'll say, now obviously what the Gemara is saying is like this. There is liability for entering, let's go back to Tuma for just a moment, because that's how this conversation started. If I am Tameh, I cannot come into this entire area, 187 amos by 135 amos. Now the Gemara says, what is that coming to exclude? Right? In other words, so obviously what it's coming to say is there might be areas around here, or maybe even part of here, that perhaps are not subject to Tumah restrictions. What areas are being included? This is very interesting. So he's talking about literally, again, windows, doorways, and thicknesses of the wall. So we'll say, as we're going to see, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but there were certain areas along the perimeter of the Beis HaMikdash and in the wall. Remember, again, there was a wall around the Beis HaMikdash as well. So there were chambers. And there were areas built into the thickness of the wall, and doors and windows that opened up into the Beis HaMikdash. So maybe what the Gemara is saying is like this. The area of 137 by 100, or 185 by 187 is this area over here, right? Is this. So perhaps, again, areas built into the thicknesses of the wall, right? Or for that matter, again, chambers, right? This black, just so you understand, this black around here is a wall. This black is a secondary wall. But perhaps, again, areas built into the walls over here. Chambers built into the walls over here. Windows or doors that open up into the Mikdash. Perhaps those, there's no problem entering Tumah into those areas. In other words, maybe what we say is that you can't enter in a state of Tumah, mamash like in what we'll call the Beis HaMikdash proper. But any areas in the thicknesses of the wall or any chambers that perhaps open up into the Mikdash area, perhaps you can enter into a state of Tumah. So the Gemara says, here's the problem. Tanina, we learned. hachalonos va'ovi achoma kilifnim. Not true. Areas that have windows, for that matter, or even areas built into the thickness of the wall, ultimately, again, have the status of the mikdash itself. Interesting. So therefore, this is two important details over here. Number one, if halacha l'maaseh you're built into the thickness of the wall, so the wall is part of the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash. And number two, if you're built into an area and you open up into the mikdash, ultimately, again, that is part of the Beis HaMikdash itself. And therefore, you could not enter into those areas in a state of tumah. So the Gemara says, so maybe it's coming to go ahead and exclude certain chambers. Right? Certain chambers you're allowed to enter into there if you are Tamei. If you look at Rashi says just before we go on, hachalonos ovi chalal hachalonos shebechomos ha'azara saviv mibifnim va'ovi achom barashalamala. So both says, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, maybe we're coming to exclude certain areas that are built into the walls themselves, windows that open up into the Beis HaMikdash. Here's the problem, says the Gemara. The Gemara says, Tanina, we learned this. Hachalonos va'ovi achoma kilifnim. Ultimately, again, areas that have windows that open up into the Beis HaMikdash and areas built into the thickness of the wall, ultimately, again, are considered to be part of the interior of the Beis HaMikdash itself. So the Gemara says, so maybe it's coming to the lishkos, chambers. I will say, by the way, I'll just point out, these sugis, if you remember again, we saw this a lot more like in the Seches Midos, Meseches Tamid. It's not as much as Zevachim. Zevachim doesn't go as much through the actual layout of the Beis HaMikdash. We end up doing a lot of it in order to understand the location of the avoda. But this is really, again, if you remember Midos land, Tamid land, we did a lot of this. Do it again in Meretz Hashem. So one second. Let's talk about these chambers. Ibnuyos b'chol u'pesuchos l'kodesh. So if you're talking about chambers that are built in technically unconsecrated areas, but ultimately, again, are open up into the Kodesh, Vatnan, Tochen, Kodesh. So Rabbi say this is a very important principle. If something is technically, we'll call it geographically built in an unconsecrated area, but it opens into a consecrated area, it is considered to be consecrated. So this is very important. So let's say, even for argument's sake, if you have chambers that are built into this wall, let's say the wall, for argument's sake, is considered to be unconsecrated. But if these chambers open up into the Kodesh, they have a status of being Kodesh, which for our purposes would mean someone who is Tamei could not enter into these areas. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but it's only midrabanan. So we'll say, what does that mean? If you look at Rashi says midrabanan, it's about halfway down in the short lines of Rashi, midrabanan. Mitzvahs chachamim hi shelo yikansu lahen betuma aval karis karban leka. To which the Gemara says something very interesting, that it could very well be that halacha l'maisa midaraisa, if an area is built in an unconsecrated area, even if it opens up into the mikdash, it's considered to be unconsecrated. Midrabanan, the Rabbanan say you have to treat it as consecrated. But Rabbanan say, but this is very important, because remember, with the Gemara is making the following distinction. When we started out over here, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, that halacha l'maisa, you are only chayiv mid-da'oraisa, for entering into a state of tumah into the mikdash proper. What's the mikdash proper? 187 amas by 135 amas. Now the Gemara says, now obviously when you make a statement like that, you're coming to exclude something. To which the Gemara now says, what are we coming to exclude? Maybe we're coming to exclude the chambers that were built in unconsecrated areas of the Temple Mount, but opened up into the mikdash. To which the Gemara says, no, we just learned in a brayso that says that unconsecrated areas built in, chambers built in an unconsecrated area that open up into the mikdash have the status of the mikdash. To which the Gemara says, you have to have the status of the mikdash, midrabanan, but not the oraisa. Which means that if someone was tamei, entered into those areas, halacha l'maisa, he would not be biblically liable. Okay, that's interesting. To which the Gemara says, one second, is that true with Araisa lo? Is that true? Is that true? That mid Araisa, if you have a chamber that is built in a geographically unconsecrated area, but it opens up into the mikdash, that you're not liable biblically for entering there into a state of tumah, Vatanya, we learned, Lishkos, Penuyos, Bachol, if you have chambers that are built in an unconsecrated area of the Beis HaMikdash, when I say Beis HaMikdash, of the Temple Mount, Upsuchos LeKodesh, but they open up ultimately again into the Kodesh. So minayin shakohanim nichnasim l'sham va'ochlin sham kodshei kadoshim v'shiyari mincha. So I said, listen to this. This is incredible. So how do I know about say if I have chambers that are let's say built in unconsecrated areas, let's say right, which is again an example of chambers that are built into the walls, but they open up into the Beis HaMikdash. How do I know that Kohanim could come in there? They could eat Kodshei Kadoshim in there. They could eat the leftover of their mincha offerings in there. They're allowed to eat that, which I also would tell me that's what? What would that tell me about these chambers? That they're part of the Beis HaMikdash proper. Talmud Lomar, Bechatzer Oel Moed Yochluha, HaTorah Ribsa, Chatzeros Harbe. So I'll say ultimately, the Torah says in the Chatzer Oel Moed you could eat it. The Torah includes many different Chatzeros, many different courtyards. So what does that come to include? That even chambers that are potentially situated in an unconsecrated area, but open into a consecrated area, are considered part of the mikdash. So one second, if you're allowed to eat kodshei kadashim there, then bepashtus, what does that mean? What does that mean? That it's part of the mikdash proper. If it's part of the mikdash proper, that sounds like doraisa, not derabanan. And if it's doraisa, not derabanan, then there should be liability for entering there into a state of tumah as well. To which the Gemara says, good. Rib Sechatzeros Harbe, Eitzel Achila Achos. To which the Gemara says, it could very well be that halacha l'mais. I'm sorry, Rib Sechatzeros Harbe, Eitzel Achila Achos. Amarava Lachila Sheni. Rava says no, consumption is different. See, I will say, we've been assuming that the laws of Achila, or at least for Kodshei Kadashim, and the laws of Tumah are intertwined. So therefore, again, if you could eat Kodshei Kadashim in a particular area, then there must be Tumah liability there as well. To which the Gemara essentially says, not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's quite possible that halacha l'maisa, that ultimately the laws of Achila and the laws of Tumah will be fundamentally different. Quite interesting. Aval le'inyan tumah. So you're telling me now, so what the Gemara is suggesting is the following, that halacha l'maisa, if you have a chamber that is situated in a geographically unconsecrated area, but opens up into the Beis HaMikdash, you could eat kodshei kadoshim there, but yet there's no tumah liability if you enter into that area. To which the Gemara says, is that true? Vatanya, lishkos habenuyos lechol upsuchos lekodesh. If you have chambers that are technically built in an unconsecrated area of the Harabayis, but yet they open up into the Beis HaMikdash proper, Kohanim nichnasim l'sham. Kohanim can enter there. Va'ochlin sham kodshei kadoshim, and they can eat their kodshei kadoshim. Ve'ein shochtim sham kodshim kalim. But you can't shecht kodshim kalim, which makes sense because kodshim kalim, although kodshim kalim could be slaughtered anywhere here, they have to be slaughtered in the Beis HaMikdash proper. Ve'chayavin mishum tumah. And you're chayav because of tumah. So what does that explicitly say? Explicitly says that again, that's explicit. Chambers built in geographically unconsecrated areas that open up into the Mikdash, you can't enter there into a state of Tumah. To which the Gemara says, Lav Amrit, ain't Shoktin. Didn't we just say that you can't shecht kachim kalim there? So remember again, if you can't shecht kachim kalim there, then what does that say? Then what does that say? That it's not a consecrated area. So therefore, again, taninami ein chayavin. So those two things have to go hand in hand. If you can't shecht kachim kalim there, that means it's not a part of the Beis HaMikdash. If it's not a part of the Beis HaMikdash, then what? Then Allah Chalamaysa, there should not be liability for entering into a state of tumah. So bishlama ein shoktin ba'ina keneged apesach v'leka. So the truth is, I understand why you can't shecht kachim kalim there. Why are both saying? Because the halach is, you saw this in yesterday's daf, that for kachim kalim, you have to shecht it opposite an entranceway to the Beis HaMikdash, right? Which means Rabbosai, which is a simple way of saying it's got to be shechted here or here, because you're always opposite the entrance to the Beis HaMikdash. If you're shechting it in, let's say, one of the chambers along here, it's not opposite an entrance. To which the Gemara says, but I don't understand, why should there not be liability for entering in by a state of tumah? In other words, if halach, one thing seems to be clear, which is that halacha l'maisa, chambers built in geographically unconsecrated areas, but opening up into the mikdash itself seemed to be kodesh. So why would there not be tumah liability there? Lutamech, according to your reasoning, in shochtin milo askinan deika shchita keneged Pesach. So furthermore, again, I don't understand why the Brisa would say that she can't kachem kalam there. Are we not talking about a situation where shchita could be done opposite an entranceway? If we're talking about a case of a chamber that opens up into the Kodesh, but yet doesn't face an entranceway into the Mikdash, then why does the Brisa need to say you can't shecht kachim kalim there? That's obvious. That has nothing to do with this chamber. That has to do with the fact that you're in violation of a simple sacrificial law. Ella, Rabbi say, watch this. Ella afagav the kashachet kneged Pesach. Tani ein shochtin mishum delo kaddish. And rather, what it's saying is like this: no, even if you have a chamber that does open up, that does face one of the entranceways to the mikdash, you still can't shecht kachim kalim there. Why not? Why not? Because I will say, since it is situated in a non-consecrated area, the chamber itself, even though it opens up to the mikdash, maybe even opens up ultimately again to an entrance to the mikdash, it is not considered a consecrated area. Therefore, you cannot shecht kachim kalim there. Tananami ein chayavim. Therefore, there is also not liability for entering into that space in a state of tumah as well. Incredible, incredible. To which the Gemara says, but for consumption of kachim kalim, you don't need to consume it opposite the doorway and entrance to the Beis Hamikdash. Fatani, we learned, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shnei Pishpishin, Hayu Bebeis HaChalifos. So we'll say this was yesterday's daf. So remember again, a quick review over here. This is the ulam, right? So remember again, this is what we call Ezras Kohanim, this entire area over here. You walk into the Beis Hamikdash. When you walk into the Beis Hamikdash, you enter into this massive antechamber called the ulam. Right? So remember we saw in yesterday's daf that on the far sides of the ulam was a chamber called Beis HaChalifos. What's Beis HaChalifos? The knife chamber. Quite literally where the Kohanim kept their knives. So if you remember again what we saw in yesterday's daf, it says, I don't know if you can see on the picture over here, there was a little entranceway, a little doorway that ultimately again led, so in other words, you can access the Beis HaChalifos two-way. You can walk up the primary entrance of the ulam, then hang a right, hang a left. There are both there. There are also tables situated in the ulam, which we'll discuss. Or you can access it ultimately again through the doorway in the back. Okay, so I will say, so now that's what we're referencing over here. So this was yesterday's daf. Yesterday's daf. So the Gemara says as follows. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shnei Pishpishin Hayo Beis HaChalifos. There were two entranceways by the Beis HaChalifos. He's referring now to the back entranceways. Two back entrances to the Beis HaChalifos. Govchan Shmona, they had a height of 8 amos. Rabbi say, now why were those entranceways necessary? Why was that necessary? This is very interesting. Kedei lahachshir es ha'azara la'achilas kodshei kadoshim u'l'shchitas kodshim kalim. So Rabbi says, remember again, the halacha is that for the consumption of kodshei kadoshim and for the shchita of kodshim kalim. Now, I want to point out, the shchita, the location of shchita for kodshei kadoshim was much more specific. You had to shecht it in very specific areas. Kodshim kalim, remember, can be shechted where? Where kodshim kalim? Anywhere in the Beis Hamikdash compound. There's just one caveat. You have to shecht kodshim kalim opposite an entrance or in proximity to an entrance of the Beis Hamikdash, which means if you're shechting kodshim kalim here, you're covered, right? Because your opposite entrance is over here. If you're shechting here, you're good because you're shechting opposite an entrance here. Where is there a problem? Back here and back here. How do we take care of that issue? These two little doorways. These two little back doorways allowed you to shecht kodshim kalim over here and over here. Right, this way you're opposite an entrance over here, opposite an entrance over here. So Moses says, and by the way, that was the whole point of these entrances, because there wasn't really a need. In other words, you could easily access the knife chambers to the front over here. These back entrances were mamish only to allow shchita of kodshim kalim back here and back here. Incredible, really incredible website. So the Gemara says as follows. So So it allowed for the consumption of kachei kadoshim, and they say you can shecht kachim kalim there as well. Sami mikan achila. So we'll say, so therefore again, so what does this mean? What does this mean? The point the Gemara is making over here is, in order to shecht kachim kalim, you could only shecht it in an area that's opposite an entrance. If that's the case, then how would you be able to go ahead and shecht kachim kalim in these chambers that are situated in the chol, right, in an unconsecrated area, even if halacha l'maisa they opened up into the mikdash? How would you be able to do that? To which the Gemara says, you're right, sami mikan achila. Take out achila from here. The Gemara says, v'haksiv bishlu es habasar pesach o amoid v'sham toch. But the pasuk seems to indicate that even achilas kachei kadoshim requires opposite an entrance. To which the Gemara says that was different. Why? The Gemara says kachei sha'a shiny. That was by the Miluim. That was by the inauguration of the Mishkan. And it's quite possible that the din by the Miluim was somewhat different than anything else. So Rabbi say, what comes out over here is as follows. So just let's kind of summarize this sugya. Although we're not finished with it yet, but at least there's a natural stopping point over here. So we started over here with a statement of Rabbi named Shmuel, that is, you're only chayiv if you enter into the Beis Hamikdash in a state of tumah. If what? If you enter into the Mikdash proper. Also important today, we got the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash. What are the dimensions? Easy to remember, 187 amas by 135 amas. And if you enter into the area that is 187 by 135, that is when there is a chiyuv kares or a chiyuv carbon, right? If you do it intentionally, chiyuv kares. If you do it unintentionally, chiyuv carbon, okay? Obviously, when the Gemara makes a statement like that, you're coming to exclude something. So the Gemara will say, so the ensuing discussion ultimately, again, is what are you coming to exclude? So the Pashtos, what everyone would agree you would be excluding is if you have chambers that are built into the walls, right, and halacha l'maisa don't open up into the mikdash proper, everyone will agree that if you enter into those chambers in a state of tumah, you are pater. Where does the machlokes come up? If you have these chambers and they have doors or windows that open up in the mikdash, does that make it part of the mikdash proper itself or not? That's the machlokes. And even if you say that it is part of the mikdash proper, what is it part of the mikdash proper for? Perhaps it's only part of the mikdash proper for tumah purposes, for tumah liability. But again, for example, can you go ahead and eat kachei kadoshim there? Can you shecht kachim kalim there? Well, again, shechting kachim kalim there could go ahead and create another problem. What's the other problem? That for sheet of kachim kalim, what do you need? Ultimately, again, opposite an entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. It's also possible that even for consumption of kachim kalim, ultimately, again, you require opposite an entrance as well. So therefore, again, I will say, that's subject to machlokes. That's also subject to machlokes. The takeaways that we have, right, the defined facts we walk away with is, number one, we've got our dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash, 187 by 135. Number two, we know that shchita of kachei kadosh, kachim kalim, could take place anywhere in the Beis Hamikdash. All you need is what? What you do need is opposite an entrance, right? Consumption of that, and that shchita of kachim kalim. Consumption of kachim kalim could take place anywhere here as well. Shchita of kachei kadoshim has its own set of halachas where that's done, as does consumption of kachei kadoshim. We also reviewed from yesterday's daf that in, again, two Beis HaChalifos, two knife chambers in the sides of the ulam, with two back entrances for those Beis HaChalifos. What was the point of those back entrances? Really one purpose, to allow shchita of kachim kalim in the areas to the side and behind the Beis HaMikdash as well. That's what we need. Good, we'll say those are our facts. The one piece that remains still mired in machlokes is the status of those chambers that are built in geographically chol areas but open up into the Mikdash. Is their status Beis HaMikdash or not? That's mired in some amount of machlokes. And even if you say they are considered part of the Beis HaMikdash, what are they considered part of the Beis HaMikdash as well? Is it tumah and shchita of kachei kadoshim, consumption of kachim kadoshim? That's still subject to machlokes. Incredible. Let's go back there. I'm Rabbi Yisrael Bar Avdumi. Minayin ledam shenifsal b'shkeas chamas. Well, it's a very interesting halacha over here. How do I know? that I will say, let's say I offer up a carbon, and obviously we know, again, we go through our processes, right? Step number one is shchita, although shchita is not avoda, right? Step number one of avoda is Kabbalah, right? It has to be done by the Kohen. Step number two, well, the machlokes, right? Step number two could either be holacha, if you need to transport the blood, or zrika. So we'll say, so obviously, zrika is supposed to be done on the same day that the carbon was offered. Let's say halacha l'maisa, ultimately the sun goes down and you did not do zrika. So now ultimately, again, the blood becomes pasul. That becomes pasul. So if you did not do zrika before shkia, the day that it was offered, ultimately, again, it's pasul. Shneimar, b'yom hakriva esivcho ye'achel. Right? V'neder onedava zevach karbana b'yom hakriva esivcho ye'achel mimachras v'anosem ani ye'achel. So listen to this. The interesting drasha. So the Gemara says, b'yom hakriva esivcho ye'achel. B'yom she'ata zoveach ata makriv. So on the day, ultimately, again, that you slaughter, that's when you have to offer up the blood. B'yom she'i ata zoveach, but on a day, ultimately, again, that you are not slaughtering it, I ata makriv, you do not offer up the blood, which we'll say is another way of saying that zrika has to occur on the same day as the shchita, the same day as the carbon. Therefore, again, if you left over the blood past the day of carbonic offering, ultimately, again, you cannot offer up the blood anymore. Take a look at the last Rashi before we turn the page. B'yom she'ata zoveach ata makriv, b'yom she'ata zoveach ata makriv, hachi gasina la b'kula sugya, kach matzasi muga v'hachi perusha, b'yom hakriva sivcho, shetehakrava uzvicha b'yom echas. Rashi understands a little bit differently. That ultimately, again, the hakrava will say in this case means the offering means the blood applications. The blood applications and the zvicha and the soy have to be on the same day. So both says ultimately again, therefore Allah says shchita, right? The actual offering, the shchita of the carbon and the zrika must take place on the same day. Therefore, if you shechta the carbon on Sunday, left the blood past sunset, you cannot offer up that blood anymore. So the Gemara says, one second, Haimi by the gufay. Now I need this pasuk to teach me the ikra halacha. What's the ikra halacha, Bosai? Rashi says over in Amud Beis, the gufay, lil mod or the lamed zman achila shlamim biyom zvicha semacharasa. Rabbi say, now that pasuk is there to teach me a separate halacha. What's the halacha? What is it talking about? That a carbon shlamim, Rabbi say, what is the window of consumption for a shlamim? It is the day that is offered and the following night. Right, that's the window of consumption. So both say, so it's Sunday. If I offer up a shlamim today, my window of consumption is today, Sunday, all of tonight, up until alos, up until dawn tomorrow morning. So that's the pasuk is coming to teach me. It's coming to teach me something else. Again, it's biyom hakrivo es zivcho, yeachel, umi macharas. So therefore, again, the Gemara says the pasuk is going to teach me that when you shech the shlamim, you have that day and that night until tomorrow. What's tomorrow? For our purposes, dawn of Monday morning. Dawn of Monday morning. So therefore, that's what the pasuk is teaching me. Not teaching anything about blood. To which the Gemara says, Im kain. If that was the case, if that was the only thing the pasuk was teaching me, Im kain nemakra biyom zivcho yeachel. Could have just said on the day that you slaughter it, you could eat it. Hakrivo lamali. Why do you need that lashon of hakriva, offering it? Shmamina, to teach me the halach of the blood. B'yom she'ata zoveach ata makriv. On the day that you slaughter it, ultimately that's when you could offer up the blood. B'yom she'ata zoveach, but on the day that you're not slaughtering it, ultimately, iyata makriv, you cannot offer up the blood. So the Gemara is actually telling you that it's a dual drasha. Two things learned out from the pasuk. Number one, the window of consumption, which Abba said, by the way, as I've said to you many times, what's so important in these Gemaras is that you're keeping track of the nuggets of information that we are assimilating. Because what we're doing is we're building up our repository of sacrificial knowledge. And each of these dapim, ultimately, again, are these little pieces of information that we are getting. So, for example, now shlamim. Shlamim, we saw this before already, but again, just to reinforce, what's the window of consumption? Day you offer it, and following night. So the Gemara says, since the pasuk since Chash Baruch Hu wrote the pasuk a little bit longhand, and it in a Yom Hikrivo, it's teaching me two halachas. Number one, window of consumption for a shlamim, that day and the following night. And number two, that the blood can only be offered up, can only be sprinkled, only applied on the day of the slaughtering. But if you slaughter and you waited to apply the blood and it's past shkia, you can't offer up the blood. Maybe this is what the pasuk is saying. Maybe the pasuk is saying something different. But let's just keep Sunday, right? So now it's Sunday. I shechted the carbon. So maybe the Torah is saying like this. If you apply the blood of the Mizbeach today on Sunday, so then ultimately, again, the meat is eaten today and tomorrow. The ikarev dam lamachar, but if you wait to apply the blood tomorrow, nisachel basar ulamachar. Nisachel basar lamachar liyomachrina. Maybe something different. Maybe the window of consumption begins whenever the blood application occurs. So if I apply the blood today, good, then I'll eat the blood. I'll eat the meat, I'll eat the carbon today and tonight through tomorrow morning. And if I wait to go ahead and apply the blood till tomorrow, then what? I'll have tomorrow and the next night to eat the carbon. Maybe that's what it's saying. So maybe again, I could apply the blood whenever I want, but just understand the window of consumption only begins when the blood is applied. To which the Gemara says, "Im kein nemakra biyom hakrivo ye'achel." Then the pasuk could just say, on the day that you offer it, offering means the blood application, ye'achel, the carbon can be eaten. Zivcho lamali. Why does it say zivcho? To teach me no. Shma mina biyom she'ata zoveach ata makrivo. To teach me no. It's tafka on the day that you slaughter the animal that the blood application must be done. Biyom she'ata zoveach, but a day when the slaughtering is not being done, ultimately, again, you cannot apply the blood. So we'll say this is a halacha l'maisa sugya. So therefore, again, with the shlamim, so two pieces of information with the shlamim. Number one, window of consumption with the shlamim is day of slaughter and the following night. So if I offer up a shlamim today, and we'll say you always have to understand. You say to yourself, okay, I don't have to remember this. It's not halacha l'maisa. It's not true. Mashiach could come now. Mashiach could come now, and there is an opinion that says that the third Beis Hamikdash, we're not going to build it with our hands. It's going to come down from Shamayim intact, which means that it is possible that still today we could offer up a carbon shlamim. I mean, not fully possible, only because most of us are tamei tumas meis, so we're probably going to need a carbon para aduma. But I have an answer for that as well. It could very well be, we know that Tumah Hutra B'tzibor. So it could very well be that Chash Baruch Hu is not going to require us to ultimately do a Parah Adumah, is going to allow us to enter Beis HaMikdash immediately, which means that it is possible that we'll be davening Mincha in a rebuilt Yerushalayim today. You have to believe that. You have to believe that Mincha could potentially occur all of Klal Yisrael together in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis HaMikdash. Anything is possible, which means that these, I always have to look at these halachas as contemporarily relevant right now. So this is good to know. Maybe you're going to be offering up a shlamim today. And you don't want to be one of those guys who offers up a shlamim like, hey, how long can I eat this for, right? You want to be that guy. You want to be that guy who knows what he's doing with the shlamim. Because everyone respects the guy who knows what he's doing with your shlamim, right? Your wife is going to respect you more. Your kids are going to respect you more. Your coworkers are going to look up to you, right? If you become the shlamim guy. So now we'll say, now you know that halacha l'maisa, a shlamim can be consumed for one day and one night. What else do I know? The day that the shlamim is offered, ultimately, again, the zrika has to be done that day. And if you fail to do the zrika that day, then halacha l'maisa, you can no longer apply the blood. Incredible. Next, itmar. Let's go weiter. Okay, so we'll say this is very interesting. So continuing along this same idea, right? So we'll say so now let's transition. There are other sug of karbanos, for example, that ultimately can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. 2 days and 1 night. So we'll discuss those categories in just a moment. Well, Rashi says, so we'll say this is really interesting. And again, I will say this is just carbonic information that we're assuming. So far we just saw that ultimately again, that now I'm transitioning over here to a shlamim. So we'll say, so now, let's say in a carbon shlamim, the Gemara says over here that you have 2 days and 1 night, right? So again, I shechted on Sunday. Again, we'll discuss, I know we're going back and forth with different shlamim. We're going to see, remember, there are different categories of shlamim, as we're going to see. So again, certain shlamim, again, it's 1 day, 1 night. Other categories of shlamim, it's 2 days and 1 night. So let's go, and again, we're going to fill in when we get to next Mishnah also. Well, next Mishnah still is back to Kachim Kalim. We'll fill in the blanks, which types are karbanos for which nights. So I'll say, so now transitioning to a shlamim that be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So now it's Sunday. I shet my carbon shlamim. So I've got Sunday, Sunday night, and Monday. When can I eat the carbon? Until nightfall Monday night. Nightfall Monday night. Now, watch this. So we'll say a little bit, we thought we were done with pigel, but a little bit back to our pigel circumstances. So in this case over here, when I'm shechting the carbon, I have in mind to eat it, ultimately what the Gemara calls ar shlishi. What's ar shlishi for our purposes? Ar shlishi is Monday night, but they're really calling it like the night of the third day. Because remember, again, I'm shechting the shlamim on Sunday, which means I could eat it Sunday night, right? And remember, Sunday night is really the night of the second day, Monday the second day. And here I now have in mind to eat it Monday night, which is really the beginning of the third day. So I will say, so this sounds just out of the gate to be like a typical chutz lizmano mindset, which is pigel, which would render the carbon invalid. So watch this. Ultimately, again, if a person has in mind to go ahead and eat until the third night. Okay, so the Gemara said like this: Chizkiya says the carbon is kasher. Rabbi Yochanan pasal. Rabbi Yochanan says it's pasal. Okay, so what's going on over here? Chizkiya kasher. So we'll say, watch this. Chizkiya says it's kasher. Why? The halo intik l'sreifa. So I will say, this is fascinating. This is fascinating, which is that ultimately Chizkiya says that it's kasher, that in other words, it's not pigel. Why? Because for our purposes, on what we call Monday night, the carbon is not yet fit to be burned. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Lo intik l'sreifa, mizmano legamrei, filios zman sreifa, so achshav atzapra, so now watch this. There's an interesting halacha by Shlamim, which is you have 2 days and 1 night to consume it. 2 days and 1 night. But halacha l'maisa, the obligation to burn the carbon as nosar actually doesn't set in until the morning of the third day. So you have this unique carbonic detail over here. So again, I shecht my shlamim on Sunday. I have Sunday night, right, which is really night 2, night of the second day, Monday, day 2, and then at the end of the day, Monday, by shkia on Monday, nightfall on Monday, I am no longer allowed to eat the carbon. But yet, I can't burn that carbon as nosar until Tuesday morning. So therefore, again, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan says, technically speaking, although you can't eat the carbon on the third night, i.e. Tuesday night, you can't call that a machshavas pigel because it's not fully set aside for non-use, so to speak. In other words, let's say, so b'pashtas, here's really what it comes down to. Generally, when you have a machshavas pigel, at the time you would have intended to eat the carbon would have already been nosar. What's unique about this case over here is I intend to eat it on Tuesday night, but it's not really nosar. When does it become nosar? Nosar means leftover. The definition of leftover is you would burn it because you can no longer eat it. But yet, when does a shlama become nosar? What? When? Really Tuesday morning. So you have this. So you have this unique idea over here. So Yochanan says you can't call that pigel. Therefore, you can't call it pigel, even though I had in mind to eat it outside of the permitted window of consumption, because that shlamim doesn't actually become nosar until Tuesday morning, and I had in mind to eat it again Monday night. It's not called pigel. It's not good. Like, don't do this, right? But lamaisa, it's not pigel, which is fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it is pigel. Why? No, it's not true. Because again, essentially pigel means having in mind to eat it outside of the permitted window of consumption. Come Monday night, you can no longer eat it. So because you can no longer eat it, therefore again, this machshav is absolutely pigel. Incredible. So we'll say a really fascinating machlokes. Fascinating machlokes. So the Gemara goes back to ha'ochel ar shlishi. Good. Next case, ha'ochel ar shlishi. So we'll say, what if, now in this case, we'll say, case number 1, when I'm shechting the carbon on Sunday, I literally have in mind to eat it on Monday night, the night of the third day. So in that case, again, Chizkiya says it's not pigel, right? And Rabbi Yochanan says it is pigel. Case number 2 is, no, when I shechted it on Sunday, I didn't have any erroneous intent. But what ends up happening over here, I actually end up eating it on Monday night, the night of the third day. So my machshava, my intention during Shechita was totally fine. Now what ends up happening over here is I actually end up eating it on the third night. So what's my liability? Chizkiah says it's not good, but that's not called eating nosar. It's not called eating nosar. Why? Why is it not called eating nosar? Because a carbon only becomes nosar when you can burn it. And when can you burn leftover shlamim? When? Only Tuesday morning. So therefore, again, it's not good, but there's not liability for eating nosar. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv Chizkiah Amar Pater Dil Integral Sreifa. So Chizkiah says you're Pater. It's not called eating nosar. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, ultimately you can't burn it. But Rabbi Yochanan says you're chayiv. Why? Because you can no longer eat it. So suppose the same machlokas, just different manifestation. Tanya Kabasei Rabbi Yochanan. There's a price that's part of Rabbi Yochanan. And I remember again, Rabbi Yochanan's position is a twofold position. Essentially, Rabbi Yochanan says once a carbon cannot be consumed, by definition it has the status of nosar, even if you can't yet burn it. So therefore, again, if I'm shechting my shlamim on Sunday, halacha l'maisa again, come Monday night, which is the night of the third day, I can't eat it anymore. Even though, again, everyone is agreeing, you can't burn it until Tuesday morning, but Rabbi Yochanan says once you can't eat it, therefore it's nosar. So therefore, that means two things. Number one, if you ate it on Tuesday night, ultimately, again, you're chayiv for eating nosar. And if when you shechted it on Sunday, you had in mind to eat it Monday night, you're chayiv for pigel. Okay? So Gemara says there's a price that's part of Rabbi Yochanan. What's the price that's part of Rabbi Yochanan? Here we go. Let's finish up. So the Gemara says, hang on, Rabbi Yochanan. Kachim hanechalim liyom echad. So ultimately, again, if you have kachim, that can only be consumed for one day. Then what's the halacha? Mechashvin bidaman misheteshaka chama or bivsaran ubeimur mishiyala mudashachar. Ultimately, again, so I'll say, so if you have kachim, that can only be consumed for one day. So literally translated, we'll see what this means. You can have machshava about their blood, misheteshaka, when the sun goes down, and ultimately, again, their meat and their sacrificial parts, mishiyala mudashachar. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Quick look at Rashi. Im shachat almanas lizrok daman misheteshaka chama pigol ubachilas basar baktaras imgureyan imchisha b'shchitas amnas lechol mibsaran ol lahakpim erein mishabla shachar pigol tanuchutz lizman dido. So we'll say, so for example, if you have a carbon, it's just example, you have a carbon, let's say, that has a 1 day window of consumption. I remember again, 1 day means the day of the offering and the following night. So therefore, again, if you so let's say I'm shechting this type of carbon, if at the time of shchita I have in mind to sprinkle its blood after shkia, after sunset, that's pigel. Or I have in mind to eat the meat, or to offer up the sacrificial parts after dawn the next day, that's pigel. Just give you an example of pigel. Next, kachim anechal l'shtei yom. But let's say you have other kachim. Abba says, I'm telling you, the different type of carbones have different windows. You have different kachim that can be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. How do you make that carbon pigel? Interestingly enough, blood remains the same either way. What do I mean by that? Blood, as we just said before in the previous sugya, when do you have to do the blood application? When does it have to be done? When? The day of the shechita. So therefore, any time you have in mind to do blood application after shkia on the day that the animal was slaughtered, that's pigel. Doesn't matter how long the window of consumption is. Right? However, again, Obivsaran, Mishetashaka Hamashal Shnei Yamim. And Allah Khalamais again, but if you have in mind to offer up the sacrificial parts, but before, after sunrise the next day, or for that matter again, with their meat to eat it after sunset of the second day, ultimately, again, that makes it pigel. So interestingly enough, this seems to support the position of Rabbi Yochanan. When does, let's say I have a carbon that can be consumed, let's say regular shlamim, that gets 2 days and 1 night, 2 days and 1 night. So now I'm shechting it on Sunday. So says the Gemara, ultimately, again, when does that carbon become, how do you make that carbon pigel? How do you make carbon pigel? Either if I have in mind to, let's say, apply the blood after sunset today, or if I have in mind to what? I have in mind to eat the sacrificial meat after sunset on Monday. On Monday, what do you see from here? That the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan, that essentially a carbon becomes pigel if you have in mind to eat it after the window of consumption closes, even if it is not yet halachic nosar. That's the halacha, because some doesn't become nosar until when? Doesn't become nosar until when? Until the next morning. This morning you burn it. So it seems to be the Gemara's paskening like Rabbi Yochanan, ultimately again, and not like Chizkiah. That ultimately again, pigel and nosar are not intertwined. That halacha l'maisa, you could be liable for pigel even though, again, the sacrificial meat did not become nosar. Incredible. Thank you, Musa. Gemara says as follows. Let's go back there. So let's finish up to the Mishnah. Tana very, very quickly. You might have thought, let's say going with our shlamim case, where the carbon could be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So I'm shechting a shlamim today. I can eat it for Sunday night, Monday, and we've gone up until Monday night. I might have thought that I should be able to eat the carbon Monday night as well, second night as well. Why? Vidinu. I'll make a kavachomer. Simar says, there are some karbanos that are eaten that have a window of consumption for 1 day. And I remember again, as we said, 1 day always means what? What does 1 day mean? 1 day and the following night until dawn. Right? So there are some karbanos that can be consumed for 1 day, but we'll just call it 1 day for our purposes. For 1 day, right? And then there's some karbanos that get 2 days, right? Which means, again, let's say Sunday night, and Monday. Just like for karbanos that get 1 day. So what else do they get? The following night. So again, if I shech the carbon today, and it's a 1 day carbon, it means I get today and tonight until when? Until dawn. So I might have said, based on that, so therefore I make the same logic, that if a carbon has a 2 day window of consumption, what should it get? The night that follows each of the days. So therefore, again, if I'm shechting it today, it should get Sunday and Sunday night. And if I can eat it on Monday, then what? I should also get what? Monday night. And it should become nosar as of Tuesday morning. Tamalomar, vanosar ad yom. Therefore, the pasuk says, ultimately, again, what is left over until day. Ba'od yom uneachal. Based on the pasuk, ultimately, vanosar ad yom. You have ad yom. You get the full day of the second day, but not the following night. Good. The Gemara says you can eat up through the full second day, but not once you get into the evening of the third day. Yachol yisaref miyad. So if that's the case, I would say, since I can no longer eat the carb on the second night, so mostly just going, I checked it, it's Sunday. I got Sunday night, Monday, up until Monday night. So I can no longer eat it come Monday night. So I would have thought to therefore burn it Monday night. Let it become the burn it Monday night. But it's a vidinu. So I would say like this, vidinu is a kavachomer. There are some karbanos that are consumed for 1 day, and some karbanos that are consumed for 2 days. Just like a carbon that has a 1 day window of consumption, which means today through tonight up until dawn tomorrow morning. And then I'll say, what happens tomorrow morning? Take a flachila sreifa. You burn the leftover, whatever is left over tomorrow morning. Zevachim hane'achalim l'shnei yamim. So too karbanos that are consumed for 2 days. I would say, take off la'achila sreifa. The model should be the same. And therefore, again, if you have a 2 day carbon, I eat it today, tonight, Monday, and then come Monday night, I should burn it immediately. Talmud lomar, b'yom hashlishi ba'esh yisarek. The Torah says explicitly, on the third day, you burn it as nosar. B'yom atasarfo, v'atasarfo balayla. Ultimately, again, you burn it by day, but you do not burn it by night. So therefore, Rabosai, a number of very important halachas come out of here. So first of all, we see that in the world of shlamim, there are different types of shlamim. There's 1 day shlamim, 2 day shlamim. And again, we'll talk about what falls into what category. In a 1 day carbon, you have that day up until dawn of the next morning. Whatever is left over dawn of the next morning is called nosar. And therefore, halacha l'maisa is burnt immediately. Then you have 2 day karbanos. 2 day karbanos I've got today, right? Day number 1, then night number 2, then day number 2. So Sunday night, Monday. Window of consumption closes Monday night. But interestingly enough, the carbon does not become halachic nosar until when? Until Tuesday morning, and is burned Tuesday morning. Interestingly enough, we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, that even though the carbon does not become nosar, ultimately again until Tuesday morning, ultimately you can't eat it obviously Monday night, which means it pigol could set in Monday night. So therefore again, if I shecht that carbon on Sunday and have in mind to eat it on Monday night, that's called pigol. That's called pigol. Pass like Rabbi Yochanan. Furthermore, again, when it comes to blood service, blood application has to take place when? On the day of the shechita itself, and having in mind ultimately to apply the blood after shkia of the day that it was slaughtered, ultimately will make the carbon pigol. Rabosai, shkoyach. What a day. What a day. All right, Chevron Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.
That's about
A second.
no, but still no order. You see, I copy from other.
That's interesting. Where is this from?
Some people have
I put this on it.
multiple.
Interesting.
I know you said we're going back and forth. First, so you doesn't Rashi say don't find a flesh to
Macharas. But macharas in that context actually means macharas is